Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to my channel. I am sorry I've had such a long break. We were on winter break for a minute and then I was doing other things, but I'm back to finish Gangsta Granny. That's right, our time with this novel has come to an end and I don't see any point in delaying it any longer. So without further ado, let's get right to it with chapter 30 entitled A Packet of Sugar. Thought you could get away with stealing the crown jewels, did you? Whined Mr. Parker. I know all about your wicked plan. Well, it's over. Officers, take them away and lock them up and throw away the key. The policeman pulled the captives in the direction of two waiting police cars. Hang on a second, shouted Ben. If we stole the crown jewels, where are they? Yes, of course, the evidence. All we need to put you two gangstas behind bars forever. Search the basket of the scooter at once, said Mr. Parker. One of the policemen went through the basket. He found a large package wrapped in soggy cling film. Ah, yes, that must be the jewels, said Mr. Parker confidently. Give it here. Mr. Parker shot Granny and Ben a smug look. He started unwrapping the package. Quite a few minutes passed until the big package was a little package. Finally, Mr. Parker reached the end of the cling film. Ah, yes, here we are, he announced, as a tin of cabbage soup fell to the ground. Could I have that, please, Mr. Parker, said Granny. It's my lunch. Search her bungalow, barked Mr. Parker. A few policemen tried to bash open the front door by charging at it with their shoulders. Granny looked on amused before venturing. I've got the key right here if you'd rather use that. One of the policemen approached her and rather sheepishly took the key. Thank you, madam, he said politely. Granny and Ben shared a smile. He then opened the door, and what seemed like hundreds of policemen charged inside. They frantically searched the bungalow, but after a short while, they re-emerged, empty-handed. There's no crown jewels in there, I'm afraid, sir, said one of the policemen. Just a Scrabble set and quite a few more tins of cabbage soup. Mr. Parker's face went red with fury. He had called out half the police officers in the country, all for nothing. Now, Mr. Parker, said one of the policemen to him, you are very lucky we aren't arresting you for wasting police time. Wait, said Mr. Parker. Just because the jewels aren't on them or in the house doesn't mean they don't have them. I know what I heard. Search the garden. Yes, dig it up. The policeman put out a calming hand. Mr. Parker, we can't just... Suddenly, a light of triumph lit up in Mr. Parker's eyes. Hang on, you haven't even asked them where they were this evening. I know they went to steal the crown jewels. And I bet they don't even have an alibi for tonight. The policeman turned to Ben and Granny, frowning. Actually, that's not a bad point, he said. Would you mind telling me where you were tonight? Mr. Parker was positively beaming now. Just then, another policeman waddled over to them. There was something familiar about him, and when Ben saw his mustache, he knew why. Boss, we've just got a call through for you on... PC Fudge began holding up a walkie-talkie. He stopped suddenly, staring at Ben and Granny. Well, he said, if it isn't the cling film people. PC Pear, said Ben. Fudge, corrected Fudge. Yes, sorry, Fudge. Nice to see you again. The superior officer looked confused. Sorry? The lad and his granny, they're the Cling Film Appreciation Society. They went to their annual meeting in London tonight. I dropped them off, in fact. So they weren't stealing the crown jewels? Asked his boss. No, laughed PC Fudge. They were merging with the Bubble Wrap Society, stealing the crown jewels indeed. He smiled at Ben and Granny. What an idea! Mr. Parker had gone red in the face. But they did it! They're villains, I'm telling you! While he was spluttering, the superior officer took the walkie-talkie from PC Fudge. Yep, right, thank you, he said. He turned to Ben and Granny. That was Special Branch. I asked them to check if the crown jewels were still there. Turns out they are. I'm sorry, ma'am and little boy. We'll have those handcuffs off you in a jiffy. Mr. Parker slumped, looking utterly dejected. No, it can't be. If I hear one more peep out of you, Mr. Parker, said the policeman, I will throw you in the cells for the night. He turned smartly on his heel and walked over to one of the patrol cars, followed by PC Fudge, who waved at Ben and Granny as he left. Ben and Granny approached Mr. Parker, their hands still cuffed together. What you heard were just stories, said Ben. Just my granny telling me stories, Mr. Parker. I think you may have let your imagination run away with you. But, blustered Mr. Parker. Me, an international jewel thief, Granny chuckled. The policemen all started chuckling, too. You'd have to be a bit daft to believe a thing like that, she said. Sorry, Ben, she whispered to her grandson. That's okay, Ben whispered back. The policemen unlocked the handcuffs and hastily retreated into their cars and vans and sped off out of Grey Close. Sorry to disturb you, madam, said one of the departing officers. Have a good day. The helicopters disappeared into the dawn sky. As the blades got faster, Mr. Parker's precious pork pie hat flew off his head and into a puddle. Granny approached Mr. Parker, who was standing hatless in her drive. If you ever need to borrow a packet of sugar, she said kindly. Yes, said Mr. Parker. Don't knock on my door or I will shove that bag of sugar up your backside, said Granny with a sweet smile. Chapter 31, Golden Light. The sun had risen and Grey Close was bathed in golden light. There was dew on the ground and an unearthly mist made the little row of bungalows look somehow magical. Ah, well, said Granny with a sigh, you'd better run home now, young Ben, before your parents wake up. They don't care about me, said Ben. Oh, yes, they do, said Granny, tentatively putting her arm around her grandson. They just don't know how to show it. Maybe. Ben yawned, the biggest yawn he had ever yawned in his life. Gosh, I'm so tired. Tonight was amazing. It was the most thrilling night of my life, Ben. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, said Granny with a twinkling smile. She took a deep breath. Oh, the joy of being alive. Then her eyes filled with tears. Are you all right, Granny? Said Ben softly. Granny hid her face from her grandson. I'm fine, child, I really am. Her voice wavered with emotion as she spoke. Suddenly, Ben knew something was very wrong. Granny, please, you can tell me. She held her hand in his. Her skin was soft but worn, fragile. Well, said Granny hesitantly, there is one other thing I lied to you about, dear. Ben had a sinking feeling. What's that? He asked and squeezed her hand reassuringly. Well, the doctor gave me my test results last week and I told you I was fine. That was a lie. I'm not fine. Granny paused for a moment. The truth is, I have cancer. No, no, said Ben, his eyes filling with tears. He had heard about cancer enough to know it could be deadly serious. Just before you ran into him at the hospital, the doctor told me the cancer, well, it's very advanced. How long have you got left? Spluttered Ben. Did he say? He said I wouldn't make it to Christmas. Ben hugged his Granny as tight as he could, willing his body to share its life force with hers. Tears were running down his cheeks. It was so unfair. He'd only really gotten to know Granny in the last few weeks, and now he was going to lose her. I don't want you to die. Granny looked at Ben for a moment. None of us are going to live forever, my boy, but I hope you never forget me, your boring old Granny. You're not boring at all. You're a proper gangsta. You very nearly stole the crown jewels, remember? Granny chuckled. Yes, but not a word of that to anyone, please. You could still get in a whole heap of trouble. It will have to remain our little secret. And the Queen's, said Ben. Oh, yes, what a nice old dear she was. I will never forget you, Granny, said Ben. You will forever be in my heart. That's the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me, said the old lady. I love you so much, Granny. I love you too, Ben, but you'd better be running along now. I don't want to leave you. That's very sweet of you, dear, but if your Mummy and Daddy wake up and find you gone, they're going to be extremely worried about you. They won't. Oh, yes, they will. Now, Ben, please be a good boy. Ben reluctantly rose to his feet. He helped his Granny up off the step. Then he held her close and kissed her on the cheek. He didn't mind her hairy chin. In fact, he loved it. He loved the whistle of her hearing aid. He loved that she smelled of cabbage. And most of all, he loved that she blew off without even knowing it. He loved everything about her. Goodbye, he said softly. Goodbye, Ben. Chapter 32, A Family Sandwich. When he finally arrived home, Ben noticed a little brown car was missing from the drive. It was still very early in the morning. Where could his parents have gone at this hour? Nevertheless, he climbed up the drain pipe, through the window, and back into his bedroom. All that clamoring was hard work. He was tired after staying up all night, and the wetsuit made him heavier than usual. Ben moved his plumbing weeklies aside so he could hide the wetsuit under his bed. Then, as quietly as he could, he put on his pajamas and climbed into bed. Just as he was about to shut his eyes, he heard the car speed up the drive and the front door open and the sound of his mom and dad sobbing uncontrollably. We've looked everywhere for him, said Dad, sniffing. I don't know what to do. It was my own stupid fault, added Mom through her tears. We should never have entered him for that dance competition. He must have run away from home. I'll call the police. Yes, you must. We should have done that hours ago. We have to get the whole country out looking for him. Hello, I need the police, please. It's my son. I can't find my son. Ben felt wretchedly guilty. His parents did care about him after all. Massively. He leapt out of bed, burst open his bedroom door, and ran down the stairs and into their arms. Dad dropped the telephone. Oh, my boy, cried Dad. He hugged Ben tighter than he had ever hugged him before. Mum put her arms around her son, too, until they were one big family sandwich, with Ben as the filling. "Oh, Ben, thank goodness you came back," wailed Mum. "Where have you been?" With Granny," replied Ben. Not quite telling the whole truth. She's very ill," he said sadly, but he could see from his parents' faces this wasn't a surprise to them. "Yes," said Dad uncomfortably. I'm afraid that she's—" "I know," said Ben. "I just can't believe you didn't tell me. She's my granny." "I know," said Dad, "and she's my mom too, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you, son. I didn't want to upset you." Suddenly, Ben could see the pain in his dad's eyes. "That's okay," he said. "Me and your mom have been up all night looking everywhere for you," added Dad, as he squeezed his son even tighter. "We never would have thought to look for you at your granny's. You always said she was boring." "Well, she's not. She's the best granny in the world," Dad smiled. "That's sweet, son, but you could still have told us you were there." "I'm sorry. After I let you down so badly at the dancing competition, I didn't think you cared about me." "Care about you?" said Dad, a shocked expression on his face. "We love you." "We love you so much, Ben," added Mum. "You must never think differently. Who cares about a silly dancing competition hosted by TV's Flavio Flavioli? I'm so proud of you, whatever you do." "We both are," said Dad. They were all crying and smiling now. It was hard to know if the tears were happy or sad ones. It really didn't matter. They were probably a mixture of both. "Shall we go to Granny's for a cup of tea?" said Mum. "Yes," said Ben. "That would be nice." "And me and your dad have been talking," said Mum, taking her son's hand in hers. "I found the plumbing magazines." "But," said Ben. "It's all right," continued Mom. "You don't have to be embarrassed. If that's your dream, go for it." "Really?" said Ben. "Really," chimed in Dad. "We just want you to be happy." "Only," continued Mom, "me and your dad think if the plumbing doesn't work out as a career, it's very important you have something to fall back on." "Fall back on?" asked Ben. He really didn't understand his parents at the best of times, let alone now. "Yes," said Dad, "and we know that ballroom dancing isn't your thing." "No," agreed Ben, relieved. "So how do you feel about ice dancing?" asked Mom. Ben stared at her. For a long moment, Mom just looked straight back at him, then finally her face cracked, and she burst out laughing. And then Dad was laughing too, and even though there were tears still in his face, Ben couldn't help joining in. Chapter 33. Silence. After that, things were much better between Ben and his parents. His dad even went to the hardware shop with him and bought him some plumbing tools, and they spent an extremely enjoyable afternoon together taking apart a U-bend. Then a week before Christmas, the three of them received a late-night phone call. A couple of hours later, Ben, Mum, and Dad were gathered around Granny's bed. She was in hospice, which is where people go when the hospital can't treat them anymore. She didn't have long left to live. Hours, maybe. The nurses said she could go any time. Ben was sitting anxiously by Granny's bed, even though she had her eyes closed and she didn't seem to be able to speak. Sitting in that room with her was an incredibly intense experience. Dad paced up and down at the foot of the bed, unsure of what to do or say. Mum sat down, looking on, feeling helpless. Ben simply held Granny's hand. He didn't want her to slip away into the darkness alone. They listened to her raspy breathing. It was a horrible sound, but there was only one sound that was worse. Silence. That would mean she was gone. Then, to everyone's surprise, Granny blinked and opened her eyes. She smiled when she saw the three of them. "I'm famished," she said in a weak voice. She reached under her sheets and took out something wrapped in cling film, which she started unpeeling. "What's that?" asked Ben. "It's a slice of cabbage cake," wheezed Granny. "Honestly, the food in here is ghastly." A little later, Mum and Dad went out to get a coffee from the vending machine. Ben didn't want to leave Granny's side for 1 second. He reached out and took her hand. It was dry, so light. Slowly, Granny turned to look at him. She was running out of time. Ben could see that. She winked. "You'll always be my little Benny," she whispered. Ben thought how he used to hate that name. Now he loved it. "I know," he said with a smile, "and you'll always be my Gangsta Granny." Later, after Granny had finally gone, Ben sat quietly in the back seat of his mom and dad's car as they drove home from the hospice. They were all tired from crying. Meanwhile, loads of people were out Christmas shopping. The roads were full of cars, and there was a long queue outside the cinema. Ben couldn't believe life was going on as normal when something so momentous had just happened. The car turned a corner and approached the little parade of shops. "Can I pop into the newsagent, please?" said Ben. "I won't be long." Dad parked the car, and as the light snow was falling, Ben made his way alone into Raj's shop. Ding! Went the bell as the door opened. "Ah, young Ben!" exclaimed Raj. The newsagent seemed to notice the sad look on Ben's face. "Is something the matter?" Yes, Raj, spluttered Ben. My granny just died. Somehow saying that made him start crying again. Raj rushed out from behind the counter and gave Ben a big hug. Oh, Ben, I'm so sorry. I haven't seen her for a while, and I guess she wasn't well. No, and I just wanted to say, Raj, said Ben between sniffs. Thank you so much for telling me off that time. You were right. She wasn't boring at all. She was amazing. I wasn't trying to tell you off, young man. I just thought you had probably never taken the time to know your granny. You were right. There was so much more to her than I ever imagined. Ben wiped the tears away with his sleeve. Raj began searching his shop. Now I have a packet of tissues somewhere. Where are they? Oh, yes, just underneath the football stickers. Here you go. The newsagent opened the packet and passed them to Ben. The boy wiped his eyes. Thank you, Raj. Is it 10 packets of tissues for the price of 9? He said with a smile. No, chuckled Raj. 15 packets for the price of 14? Raj put a hand on Ben's shoulder. You don't understand, he said. They are on the house. Ben stared. In all the history of the world, Raj had never been known to give anything away for free. It was unheard of. It was madness. It was going to make Ben cry if he wasn't careful. Thank you so much, Raj, he said, quickly, choking up a little. I better get back to my parents. They're waiting outside. Yes, but just one moment, said Raj. I have a Christmas present somewhere here for you, Ben. He started rummaging around his cluttered little shop again. Now, where is it? Ben's eyes lit up. He loved presents. Yes, it's right here behind the Easter eggs. Found it, exclaimed Raj as he produced a bag of Murray mints. Ben was a tiny bit disappointed, but he did his best to hide it. Wow, thank you, Raj, said Ben, doing his best school play acting. A whole packet of Murray mints. No, just one mint, said Raj, opening the bag and taking a single Murray mint out before handing it to Ben. They were your granny's absolute favorite. I know, said Ben with a smile. Chapter 34, Zimmer Frame. The funeral was on Christmas Eve. Ben had never been to a funeral before. He thought it was bizarre. As the coffin lay at the front of the church, the mourners mumbled their way through unfamiliar hymns, and a vicar who had never met Granny made a tedious speech about her. It wasn't the vicar's fault, but he could have been waffling on about any old lady who had just died. He went on in a dreary monotone about how she liked visiting old churches and was always kind to animals. Ben wanted to shout out. He wanted to tell everyone, his mom and dad, his uncles and aunts, everyone, there about what an incredible granny she was, how she told the most amazing stories. And most of all, he wanted to tell them about the marvelous adventure he had shared with her, how they had nearly stolen the crown jewels and met the queen. But no one would have believed him. He was only 11. They would assume he had made the whole thing up. When they arrived home, most of the people who were at the church descended on the house. They drank cup after cup of tea and ate plate after plate of sandwiches and sausage rolls. It seemed weird having the Christmas decorations up at such a sad time. At first, people chatted about Granny, but soon they were gossiping about other things. Ben sat alone on the sofa and listened to the adults talking. Granny had left him all her books, and they were now cluttering up his bedroom in great piles. He was tempted to hide away in his room with them. After a while, a kindly-looking old lady moved slowly across the room with her Zimmer frame and eased herself down next to him on the sofa. You must be Ben. You don't remember me, do you? Said the old lady. Ben looked at her for a moment. She was right. Last time I saw you was your first birthday. No wonder I don't remember, thought Ben. I am Granny's cousin Edna, she said. Me and your Granny used to play together as girls, when we were just about your age. I had a fall a few years ago and couldn't cope on my own, so I was put into an old folks' home. Your Granny was the only person who would come and visit. Really? We didn't think she ever went out, said Ben. Well, she came to see me once a month. It wasn't easy for her. She had to get 4 different buses. I was extremely grateful. She was a very special lady. She was indeed. Incredibly fine, kind, and thoughtful. I don't have any children or grandchildren of my own, you see. So me and your Granny would sit in the lounge of the old folks' home and play Scrabble for hours together. Scrabble, said Ben. Yes, she told me how much you liked playing it too, said Edna. Ben couldn't help but smile. Yes, I loved it, said Ben. And to his surprise, he realized he wasn't lying. Looking back, he had loved it. Now as Granny was gone, every moment he had spent with her seemed precious. More precious than the crown jewels. She never stopped talking about you, said Edna. Your dear old Granny said you were the light of her life. She said she would really look forward to you coming to stay on a Friday. It was the best part of her week. It was the best part of my week too, said Ben. Well, if you like Scrabble, you must pop down over to the old folks' home one day for a game, said Edna. I need a new partner now that your Granny's gone. That would be great, said Ben. Later that evening, as his parents watched the Strictly Stars Dancing Christmas special, then climbed out of his bedroom window and slid down the drain pipe. Without making a sound, he took his bike out of the garage and cycled to Granny's house one last time. Snow was falling. It crunched under the wheels of his bike. Ben watched it come down, landing softly on the ground, barely paying attention to his route. He knew the journey off by heart now. He had cycled to the old lady so many times over the last few months, he knew every bump and crack in the road. He stopped his bike outside Granny's little bungalow. There was a scattering of snow on the roof. Post was piled up outside, and lights were all off, and there was a for sale sign with icicles hanging off it standing outside. Even so, Ben was half expecting to see Granny at the window, looking at him with that hopeful little smile of hers, but of course she wasn't there. She was gone forever. But she wasn't gone from his heart. Ben wiped away a tear, took a deep breath, and cycled off home. He sure had an amazing story to tell his grandchildren one day. Postscript. P.S. Christmas is a special time of year, said the Queen. She was her usual serious self, seated majestically on an antique chair in Buckingham Palace, once again delivering her annual message to the nation. Mum, Dad, and Ben had just finished their Christmas lunch and were slumped together on the sofa with mugs of tea watching the Queen on TV as they did every year. A time for families to get together and celebrate, Her Majesty went on. However, let's not forget the elderly. A few weeks ago, I met a lady around my age and her grandson at the Tower of London. Ben squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. He glanced at his parents, but they were watching TV oblivious. It made me think how the young need to show a little more kindness to the elderly. If you are a young person watching this, perhaps give up your seat for an elderly person on the bus, or help them carry their shopping. Share a game of Scrabble with us. Why not bring us a nice bag of Murray mints once in a while? We old folk do love a nice chomp on a mint. And most of all, young people of this country, I want you to remember this. We old people are certainly not boring. You never know. One day we might even shock you. Then with a mischievous grin, the Queen lifted up her skirt to the entire country and flashed her Union Jack knickers. Mum and Dad spat out their tea all over the carpet in astonishment. But Ben just smiled. The Queen's a proper gangsta, he thought. Just like my granny. And that, my dears, is the end of Gangsta Granny by David Walliams. I hope you enjoyed it. It made me a little bit sad. I'm sure we've all lost somebody we love, but it's important to remember them fondly and to make good memories with the people that you love, the people that are in your life while you still can. So if your granny or gramps are still alive, why don't you go and give them a call? Anyway, I will see you soon with a new book. We'll talk about that later. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you are all in the best of health and iman. Bye, y'all.